Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Yes, this weekend is the Heineken Champions Cup final taking place in Marseille on Saturday. It's Leinster versus La Rochelle. Kickoff is at 4:45pm. It's a repeat of last year's semi-final when La Rochelle surprised Leinster and took that final spot against Toulouse as they were later beaten in that final. I'm delighted to be joined by Andy Dunne to look ahead to the game. How are you, Andy?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah.
Good. The team news is just out. We've heard that Leinster is unchanged from their semi-final. Any surprises in there?
No, I don't think so. I think the only surprise being that maybe Furlong was deemed fit to start, which is a huge boost. So yeah, I don't think there was any real selection queries or 50-50 calls based on that performance the last day against Toulouse, which was as close as I've seen a team come to. You know, you hear these cliches about a team being in the zone, and what it actually means. This kind of, a lot of action without striving, and just this effortless flow to their game. Even though there's huge physical work going in, it looked effortless for at times 20, 30, 40 minutes. This flow, and sometimes it's just the nicest word to put on it. That doesn't happen without months and years of construction and toil, but it came together so beautifully at times in that Toulouse game that there was never any doubt that those who played, if fit, were going to start in the final. It would have been extremely harsh on any player. That's probably one of the only concerns also going into the final, is when a team reaches that height and that it was a peak performance in the last 4 or 5 years. It's just can you do it again?
Go again.
Do you strive to try and reach that again? Because it seemed to happen in an effortless way. And you hear about a snooker player being in the zone, and you don't strive to get there. It just happens on occasion with years of work and years of effort. And that seemed to happen in the semis for Leinster. So I've seen Steph Curry, on the NBA warm-up.
Yeah.
And he's thrown the ball. He does this warm-up, and it clearly takes a huge amount of skill and years of training, but he looks like he could do it with his eyes closed. And I think he actually does some of the throws with his eyes closed. He starts at the free throw line and he goes back. He comes back in towards the net, and he does about 15 shots. They all land. They don't hit the rim. That would be a kind of a similar analogy, I think, for how good Leinster were.
They were that good
against Toulouse, and it was a joy to watch. So just a little concern that they've reached that dizzy height in the semi-final. Hard to replicate that consciously anyway, and just try and let's be as good as we were. I think if they're even 80% as good as they were against Toulouse, I still think they should win.
And they had those injury concerns, as he's mentioned. Tyke Furlong, James Lowe, they're going to start now. I think James Lowe, he's been massive for them. We've seen him against Toulouse, a brace of tries. Yeah. He's just loving it out there.
Yeah. You kind of mentioned they're a joy to watch. He particularly has this sense of freedom when he plays. But one thing that struck me, I was at the game with a couple of mates, is the distance on his kicks. He absolutely launched 3 or 4 kicks, maybe 60, 70 metres. Completely changed the momentum in the match at times, and he's not necessarily he's noted for kind of a carefree attitude, and he's noted for he's a brilliant he can pass brilliantly out of the tackle, and he gets involved in midfield even though he's on the wing. But maybe sometimes that's overlooked how devastating that left boot can be. And again, Leinster being in such high command of everything they were doing. The ruck was well set up, the pass was perfect. He had time on all his kicks, but nonetheless he didn't shank one of them, and they made a big difference during the game at times when Leinster were under pressure. And in a cup final, to have options like obviously Sexton to clear the lines, but to have a left footer, they had that in the years with Carney, to have a left footer to get you out of trouble in deep territory, I think that's a huge addition. Yeah.
Oh, he's massive, absolutely massive. So it's great news that he's going to be in there. The only really maybe surprise, I don't know, no space for Jordan Larmour on the bench, but he had a good performance against Munster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough on him. They definitely have strength and depth. He's coming back from interrupted season really and seasons. So I would have thought they maybe looked at just the level of intensity required, and that having only just come back into the fold, it might have been too big a step. I don't think there's any doubt of his talent and his capacity overall. I would have thought that was a decision partly made with sports scientists and medics and the coaching team, as opposed to any views on his overall quality or technical ability.
But it's still tough, It's a Champions Cup final. That squad, we speak about the strength and depth they have, but it's difficult to be that player.
Yeah, hugely. And they don't come around every year. I mean, Leinster, obviously, the last one was Saracens a couple of years back, but when you're in a squad that gets that close, literally everyone wants to be involved on match day, and it galvanises the group and it galvanises training, and in a way it makes sense that the second string Leinster were still able to beat a full strength Munster, because when you're in that feel good mode as a group and everyone's trying to impress and get into a final day squad, it does galvanise the group. But it's an incredibly difficult place to be when you don't get the nod for the match day squad, and everything you've worked for, and 23 others are going out there on the day and getting the rewards, and you are effectively forgotten for the day. But the only thing I'd say to try and comfort the likes of Jordan Larmour is he's young and super talented, and he's 15, 20 Irish caps behind him as well. Like, he's a big future, so hopefully he sees many more days like that.
Yeah, no doubt he will. And with this Leinster team, it's constantly rotating, because there has been so many players playing with Ireland, and we've seen them dominating even when their Irish players weren't there. That's probably what's been so impressive about it. Actually, I seen a stat just before I come on that 12 of Leinster's starting 15 tomorrow also started Ireland's victory over the All Blacks last November. That is quite insane.
Yeah, and the level of confidence that must give to the group. Everybody, I think, is aware just how much they are, how driven they are. But the key figures within the group, the level of drive, if you start from Furlong at the front, he's clearly a driven individual, but his talent level is through the roof. I played at 10. I played a couple of European Cup semis and one final, or Challenge Cup final rather. But if I had the first 20 minutes that he had against Toulouse, and I never did in any of those games, I would have thought I'm having an absolute stormer as a 10. He put a guy through a hole, passing just off the shoulder. He put a guy through a gap, passing a no look, a kind of a flick pass over his shoulder behind one of the other Leinster players, and then he threw this right to left 30-yard spiral pass on the run. It, honestly, and if Sexton did those three things, and he's doing them anyway, he'd be happy. But seeing that from Furlong, that type of stuff inspires the team, but it's his determination and drive. You then look down through any one of those 12 you're talking about who've beaten the All Blacks, and the three others who weren't involved with the All Blacks. But I do think Sexton in particular, people have spoken this week about his lack of involvement with the Lions last year being a huge plus in terms of his physical freshness. I think his involvement with the Irish management, who've given him a sense of there's a fresh approach there, seems to have liberated him somewhat. I'm sure Stuart and Leo, who know him so well, are getting the best out of him, but he is kind of at peak level at 36, which is amazing in rugby too. So 12 starters from the All Blacks, the likes of Sexton and Furlong, who are world class. It's no wonder they are where they are, and it's no wonder that I think they're the bookies' favourites. Yeah.
And people have been having the question, have Leinster been tested yet? And I know we've just talked about how many start for Ireland, so we'd like to say, well, they've been tested in Six Nations, but as a whole, have they been tested yet, do you feel?
I think Toulouse, for example, tested them on a number of occasions. In terms of Toulouse, were very organised in the first 10 minutes defensively, and they weren't able. Nobody could live with the onslaught and the it was relentless what Leinster did. That's not about a failure to be tested. That's just they overcome any of the tests by relentlessness, high level of execution. I don't believe teams have gone out and laid down in front of them, and therefore they're underprepared. They've kind of steamrolled over teams through force of will and high quality execution. There's a difference. So they demolished one of the great Toulouse sides. That doesn't mean they weren't tested. They had to go and demolish them. That takes a lot of work. The scoreline, the 40-17 scoreline, is a fair reflection of their quality, but it didn't mean it was a stroll in the park for them. So I don't subscribe to the idea that they haven't been tested. I just think they've been kind of high level excellence, and there's a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And from 12 months ago when they played La Rochelle in the semi-final, what are the main differences that you see in this Leinster team now?
Well, I think they've got the capacity to vary their game a bit more. I think they tried to play a certain way against La Rochelle, and La Rochelle were able to unpick it. La Rochelle obviously went after the front five, went after the scrum, drove lineouts, tried to kind of break the spine of that Leinster team. I think they're a year older, a year wiser. The likes of Stewart, the likes of Leo, they don't take those defeats lightly. Sexton wouldn't have taken, I know he wasn't involved last year, but just as a person, they don't take those defeats lightly. I think there's a need, there's a deep hunger and need in them to prove to people this team can go and win again. Having lost in Saris, that really hurt them, and then the semis last year in La Rochelle. So what I think as a result they've learned to be flexible in their approach. I think they've learned to absorb physical onslaughts like that will come through Antonio and Will Skelton, and I think they've learned to absorb that impact and ways to deflect it. One of the things I noticed, if we reference the 12 Leinster lads who played in the All Blacks or who featured in the Six Nations, in the French game away, would have been largely 7 or 8 of the Leinster starting pack. They were able to absorb this physical onslaught from France. That wasn't the winning or losing of the game away in France. We absorbed their driven maul. We worked out ways to combat their scrum, and I think that wouldn't have happened maybe 12 months ago. We may have folded under the physical pressure. So the pain of the losses and experience and a bit of versatility in how we approach it, I think they've more than one way to adapt against La Rochelle, and I think that's the difference. I think when La Rochelle put the squeeze on through 150 kilo tight head Antonio and God knows what is Will Skelton, he's probably something similar. There's a huge amount of force coming down those channels, but I think they've worked out ways to offset that, and that takes a huge that disarms La Rochelle somewhat, and that I think that I've also been aware that La Rochelle have that offload game, and Leinster prefer to not defend it. Nobody wants to defend against a good offload game, and I'm sure they're going to be pretty disruptive. The likes of Van der Fleer and both centres, for example, who've been hugely strong at the breakdown. I think they're really going to try and be disruptive to that offload game. I think there's one or two ways at least that I think they're going to try and have flexibility in their game so they don't get stung the way they've got stung by Saris, and the same way they got stung by La Rochelle, which was kind of physically overpowered.
Even speaking to Leo Cullen this week, you could definitely feel the hurt or the pain. You know, the way sometimes people ask that question, is that a motivation factor?
Yeah. And
a lot of the times, like, oh, that's just a typical question to ask, you know, if you've lost to a team, but you could actually sense that.
Yeah.
I 100% could.
And it's nice that you can sense that. It's a human reaction. I often reference Liverpool here. I'm a big Liverpool fan. I loved seeing Mo Salah say, his revenge on the cards against Madrid. It's like, you're damn right it is. I mean, but I think the Leinster team are feeling a deep hurt about. I think it's more the question markers. Like they're good to a point, but when they play against the big boys on semi-final and final day who put the squeeze on them physically, they're not up to it, and that that's a big slap in the face if you're a professional team of their quality. And I think they really, really want to go out there and prove to people they can manage the physical onslaught of the likes of people we mentioned, 250 kilo lads scrummaging against Porter's Channel. Can they hold up on the scrum? And it's not just down to Porter, it's Maloney maybe in behind him, or James Ryan, whichever is in behind him. But it's certainly is an 8-man effort to not lose that physical battle, and it's destructive to their ego, and it's destructive to their whole confidence levels if they don't manage to absorb it. So I think that I do think there's a deep kind of drive in them to prove people wrong, and that is a pretty dangerous combination when they've got the talent they have and the experience they have.
And they have been consistent over the last number of years, but also I feel they've underperformed when it comes to Europe. Would you think that they feel like that?
Yeah, I certainly covered I was at the final in St James's Park against Saracens. Covered it for Off the Ball, and they were absolutely, that game was there for the taking. The narrative then becomes afterwards you're overpowered and you physically couldn't stand up to par with these lads, but they left 2 to 3 tries behind them on the day. There was a pretty significant mistake made by Ringrose with a 3-man overlap. It literally would have walked it in, would have changed the whole dynamic of the match, I think about 10 minutes into the second half. And so then that also grates with people and within the group, and no more so than Ringrose, I'm sure also. But because the story becomes you weren't physically up to it, which is not the case when you break down the minutiae, So I think, I just
feels like they need this to back up.
It's almost good, it's a good thing that they're coming up against the likes of Antonio and Skelton and a huge French pack, because once they win, they can just put it to bed that they are a team that can take on that increase in physicality. And there's all this chat about Leinster bringing the academy players through, and they've lots of internationals and lots of quality, but against the bigger French and English sides and the salary cap and all this chit chat, that ultimately they can't quite go and finish the job, and we all know they can. They've done it in the past, but it'd be a sweeter win for them to do it against this type of forward pack from La Rochelle.
And just to talk a little bit about La Rochelle, we heard that Will Skelton, he returns.
Yeah.
He was on last weekend as well for a few minutes as well.
Yeah.
I know he was meant to be out for the season, but he made his return, so he's in. And then the back row of both Victor, Vito, and scrum half Carbarlo will miss out. So those two are massive. Yeah.
Well, Skelton seems to have the hots for Leinster. He's he was incredible in that game 2 years ago in St James's Park for Sarries. And he was incredible last year in the semis. So he seems to get turned on by the fact he's going to take on these Leinster lads and crush them. He's an important selection to start for them. I think it'll strike a little bit of healthy fear into Leinster, but I think they'll also be canny and they'll be aware that he hasn't got 80 minutes in him. He definitely doesn't. He's too big, and he's not match fit enough to be destructive for 80 minutes. So I think if they can somehow simmer down his impact in that first 30 to 40 minutes, they've probably done a large amount of work to get in there and winning. I think the loss of Vito and Carbarlo are probably more significant than Skelton starting. Actually, I think. Carbarlo is a lot like Gibson Park. He dictates the entire tempo of their game. He's very combative 9 as well, so the back row have to keep an eye out for him all the time. They can't take their eye off him. So he caused a lot of hassle for defenders, and he runs that tempo in their whole attack, which Rog is huge on in terms of that whole keep the ball alive.
Yeah.
Keep the speed of the ball. Keep the ball off the floor for as long as you can. He's very central to that. So I think he's a huge loss. And Vito, we all know, is kind of an all-round athlete, brilliant passer, brilliant defender. So yeah, I think they're two pretty big losses. Yeah, can't see Skelton lost after 45.
That's what I was thinking.
Minutes.
Do you start him or do you have him come on?
Yeah, it's a good one. I would have thought they would have benched him, but I'd say they're just going to try and maybe win a psychological battle. More than one or two of them. It looks like they're going to go after the Leinster scrum. They're going to try and attacked them where everyone is where we've been talking about, where everyone has questioned their spine and their physicality. And I would say that O'Gara is saying, let's get in early and try and cause huge doubt, cause disruption rather in their group, and see how they react. I certainly don't see Skelton lasting it. Hopefully then Leinster can reduce his impact. Yeah.
It's all the mind games that Ronan O'Gara has been playing. Rugby and Off the Ball is with Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. And just when we were talking about the mind games, Kerr that he's 2 broken bones in his hand.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you heard this story during the week, but they were saying that Ronan O'Gara was looking to get one of those micro gloves, one of the hurling gloves.
Hurling gloves, yeah.
Yeah, in order for him to maybe help him to play. So they were going to see obviously what the pain threshold was like, if he could grip the ball with it on. But obviously it seems like it's not going to happen. That would have been some story if that happened. But actually it's happened before, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, Ronan has said that he's heard it before in rugby that, they've used these gloves.
Yeah, there's loads of side stories of players who've gone in or out of games, stayed in a game with a broken hand, stayed in a game with a broken foot, various things that you just think couldn't be possible. But I don't know about going into a European Cup final as a 9 with 2 broken hands. I would imagine he could get an injection or 2. He could get it strapped up. Adrenaline would be through the roof, and he would get through 10 minutes. But at some point, the actual task he has to do, which is grip, twist, spin, catch, like it's just constant hand work specific to his own position. And if it's impacted in terms of his pace of passing or his delivery to 10, the whole game is impacted. So I think they're being pragmatic ultimately. It doesn't matter how much of a hero he is. I'm sure if you held a gun to his head and said go out and play, the lad would go out and play.
Yeah.
It's just going to impair his function I think it's too high a degree of impairment to his overall function. As a 9, 2 broken bones in your hand, it's just he could get through the pain barrier, but I just don't think he could get through the function barrier, So.
Yeah. No, it'd be incredibly difficult. When I heard the story, I was like, surely not, it is. But even just having the team on paper, I heard a few of the La Rochelle lads speaking this week. They were saying that it doesn't mean anything these days. It depends so much on the mind. They said like all the pressures on Leinster, that they have nothing to lose.
Yeah.
Is it a mind game too?
Oh yeah, at this level it's probably bigger than anything else. If you look down through the teams, this is a La Rochelle team that was in the European final last year, that was in the French domestic final, and are now in a 3rd final in the space of 12 months. You don't do that unless you're high quality, and so they're I think there's, in terms of just overall quality, they're slightly below. If you're giving Leinster a 9 out of 10, they're an 8.5, something like that. So therefore, yes, what is the difference in those cases? It's who wins the psychological battle. Rog has huge mental strength. There's a famous interview he did about missing kicks at clutch moments.
Yeah. It's incredible.
Early in his career, and you watch that video and the hairs in your neck are standing up, and he talks about how he managed to turn that around. And
then he was dying to take
and he wanted to take he was hoping he could take the
he was hoping it would come to that. Yeah,
that's his mindset now as a player, and has transferred into a coach, years of experience, having gone away, being in France, understanding the French psyche, the French approach to these games, with Racing, seeing the Crusaders, who are absolutely masters of the winning at clutch moments. I think they've ridiculous 12 or 13 Super Rugby titles. I think it's part of that environment, and now he's in an environment that he's contributed hugely in terms of getting to 3 finals. So he has got absolutely years and years of experience of psychological warfare, trench warfare in these killer moments. So it's actually, it makes that, if I'm talking about a 9 out of 10 in quality for Leinster and an 8.5 with La Rochelle, and then you start adding in O'Gara's psychological strengths, it seems to make that 0.5 gap a lot smaller.
And when we say it's Leinster against La Rochelle, it's Leinster against Ronan O'Gara's La Rochelle. You know, this is the most interesting thing, you know.
Yeah.
And he's been incredible as a head coach, you know.
Yeah.
And even just seeing him on the sideline, the passion that he has, it's really just immense.
I think, but there's obviously, there are strong characters across the whole story of the game. You could say it's Stuart Lancaster and Leo's Leinster and Johnny Sexton's Leinster against O'Gara. And I think the two of them, you know, put in a Coliseum would fight to the death to win this game. So, and it is a sense that there is that kind of Coliseum feel to watching these two fellas go toe to toe since, you know, whatever, 2006 or 2009, and all the much the press that followed, you know, their spat and then their friendship, and so like, there are very strong characters on both sides, which makes it more entertaining and whets the appetite more, because you know there's all kinds of tactics going on in the background. Every sentence is thought out in every press conference. I think there's a lot going into it. The mind games, the chess, and then the actual quality on show. So.
And Ronan O'Gara, when he was speaking this week, he actually talked about how he thinks that Johnny Sexton has improved his game even further.
I didn't actually hear that piece, but I think.
Yeah, he was just saying his running game, his passing game, a good kicking game, and he sees every opportunity before everyone else. Yeah,
I think there's, if you're to summarise that, I would say what Sexton's added is a balance to, like, he's always had the quality to kick, he's always had the quality to run himself, he's always had the quality to be a good distributor. But he seems to be balancing that out through a 60 to 80 minute performance. I think he may not admit it, I think certainly with ball in hand he's less physical, he's not taking it to the line as much and taking on people, but when he does, he's more effective. So he used to do it on a regular occasion and try it and knock on the door, and he'd get pummeled a bit and he would stand up and get on with it, but eventually your body gives in. I think now he's got a much more sharpness to his game with ball in hand, because when he goes, and the semi-final was a prime example, that he sold the dummy, ran through, he left the Toulouse second row for dead, but the line break resulted in a try with no physical contact made on Johnny Sexton. And that's key at his age, and everything else goes with it. You have to be smart about these things. Absolutely, and I think that's been a huge shift in his game from recent years, the overall variation. But then, as Raj mentioned, I think there's that game knowledge, that hard to define 16 years at the coalface game knowledge, and Lancaster mentioned he's a student of the game. Just if he's all those things, if he's working harder than anyone else to analyse the opposition, he's 16 years of experience at the top. He's built that way where he wants to strategically unpick teams, and then he's learned about his own weaknesses and challenges previously, and he's got rid of them to a large degree. Yeah, he's a pretty potent combination, and I don't think that's a mind game from O'Gara. I think that's just an observation of fact, and I think he knows he's being transparent enough to say he's probably playing at the peak of his powers. Best rugby we've seen, absolutely. Yeah. And some predictions then. What prediction would you give, Andy? I think the deep hurt and need and want in Leinster is too strong to lose. I think they're going to find a way. I don't think they're going to put a performance together like they did against Toulouse, because I think those kind of performances are, as I said, you know, effort without striving. They're kind of hitting the zone, and it doesn't happen back to back very often for teams. I think they'll have an 80% as good a performance that they did in the semis, and that'll be too strong for a strong La Rochelle team. But do you have a score at all? I'll throw out off the top of my head now that you've asked me. I would say something like 24-18, 24-16, something like that. So still close enough. Yeah, absolutely. Well, as main sponsor of the Irish rugby team, Vodafone has an exclusive competition for Vodafone customers. Win a trip to see each Irish rugby versus New Zealand test game during the summer tour, with flights, hotel and spending money all included, with hashtag Fantastic Fridays in the My Vodafone app. Entry via the My Vodafone app closes at midnight May 29th. Cheers, Andy. Thanks for joining me. Thanks a million, Aisling.
Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.